We're joined now at the library by Attorney General Andrea Campbell for July's edition of Ask the AG. If you have a question for her, you give her a call or a text at 877-301-8970. If you're at the library, you look for our colleague Zoe, who would be right there. That would be Zoe. And you say, I'd like to talk to the Attorney General. There's a fairly good chance you'll be able to. Attorney General, good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks
so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
It's great to be here, especially with that beautiful baby over there.
Oh, my goodness. Newborn. Wow.
Good to be here.
Congratulations. Going from a newborn, which is so hopeful and happy, to all our problems, which are not great, and so hopeful and happy. But let's start with the thing that's dominating the news. President Biden, he's going to give a press conference tomorrow. A lot of people are hoping that he does well, fearing that he may not do well. Do you think, Attorney General, you're a Democrat, he should step aside?
I've repeatedly said that's a question for President Biden. As long as he and, of course, Vice President Harris are in this race, I am fully supporting them. I think what I am focused on and stressing to the residents and the average resident that maybe isn't paying attention is just how critical and important this election is. It is the most important election of our lifetime, and I've been stressing to folks, because it has not been a part of the narrative, we need to focus on the issues. If you want access to reproductive health care, if you want access to IVF, if you want access to abortion health care because, for example, you are pregnant and in week 18 you got a diagnosis that the child you're carrying is going to die, and you don't want to carry that child to full term. You want that choice with your provider and with your partner or spouse. Biden and Harris are the only folks that are focused on that. If you want to deal with issues of economics and affordability, we're taking on junk fees, student loan debt. Biden, Harris, the only the only candidates that are focused on that. If you care about your children, and I'm a mom of 2 young boys, and protecting them in terms of gun violence, which is the number one cause of death with our young people, everything having to do with their mental health, making sure they have clean drinking water, Biden and Harris are our folks.
But
it's as simple as that.
But, of course, other Democrats, including Kamala Harris, are in the same place on the issue. So I guess the question is, do you hope he decides that maybe he's not the most effective messenger for those issues, because he has gone from losing a little bit before the debate to losing considerably in some of these swing states after the debate. And Kamala Harris, in some polls at least, is doing better than Joe Biden is against Donald Trump.
I support both of them fully, and I know the Vice President has been unequivocal in saying she is standing with our President. And at the end of the day, I think one thing I want to stress is running for public office, and in this moment in time, being the President of the United States takes tremendous sacrifice. And if you care about all the issues I just mentioned, and, of course, protecting our democracy, our rule of law, ensuring there's no political violence in this country or another coup where, if that happens, the president, based on a recent Supreme Court decision, would get away with that and have absolute immunity. If you care about everything that we probably take for granted in this country and we want it to continue to be a democracy, Biden and Harris are your only choices in this election, and more importantly, that sacrifice that the president is making every single day on behalf of all of us. The question now becomes, what's the sacrifice you're going to make to protect this country? Are you going to get out and vote? Are you going to get out and phone bank? Are you going to get out and door knock? Are you going to get out and do your part to support this ticket, which is really important?
You know, I don't even know how to put this, because I have great respect for you. I refuse to believe that people watched the debate last Thursday. And by the way, I know I speak for Marjorie. We think this president has done remarkable things. Remarkable things. I don't know how someone can watch that debate last Thursday. And the next morning you wake up and you hear Nancy Pelosi saying the issue is it a condition or an episode? That's actually not the question. Even if it's only an episode, what happens when another episode happens at a critical moment, or another episode? When that debate was over, 10:42, a week ago Thursday, you said to assume you're home, you said to yourself, that man can lead us for another 4.5 years?
What I said to myself, it was a difficult debate to watch, and it was painful. And the next day, I had to go on television and talk about this election. And what I stressed is he's going to have to step it up big time in order to rally people, most importantly, infuse enthusiasm in this election. And that was his and remains his choice. He's earned being President of the United States. He's earned being the nominee of this particular election. And my job is to say, that's your choice. He's going to talk to his folks in his inner circle, including his family, and pray about it. And, you know, I'm a praying woman. But at the end of the day, we cannot take our focus off what matters the most. There are 2 choices currently in this election: Biden, Harris, and Trump. You care about the issues I mentioned, your children, democracy, rule of law, reproductive health care, affordability, economics, the middle class doing better than before, the poor doing better than they did before. They're the only choice. And at the end of the day, the recent Supreme Court case that people often are also not paying attention, that gave the president absolute immunity in certain cases, including if you weaponize your Department of Justice against your people, that's okay because you did it in your professional responsibilities. If you start a coup and an insurrection in your country, that's okay because you did it as the President of the United States. Fundamentally upended this idea that no one is above the law and made Trump above the law. So the only choice in this election, it's crystal clear, Biden, Harris, and not Trump. And I'm going to do everything in my power to support the Democratic ticket. And again, I stress to folks who are listening, I stress to folks who are paying attention, it's not our job to question right now whether or not he's okay. He's okay. He's demonstrating that with the vice president. It's our job to question what's the sacrifice we personally want to make, and maybe professionally, to make sure that this country continues to be a democracy, continues to care about humanity, continues to ensure we don't get a coup and political violence in this country, continues to value the certification of elections. That's what I'm focused on, and people better wake up.
Okay, so one last question about national things, and then we'll come back to Massachusetts at 877-301-8970. In addition to the Supreme Court decisions around Donald Trump, you're addressing a class of, which I assume you do, let's say high school kids. And they say there were 4 criminal cases brought against the former president of the United States. He was found guilty in one. The sentencing was postponed because of a Supreme Court decision. The whole case may get thrown out. Nothing is happening in Georgia. He has a judge in the tank in Florida. Nothing is happening there. And the Washington case is may never be tried now because of the Supreme Court decision. Attorney General, why should I believe that there is a fair justice system that's going to treat me appropriately and fairly in this country? What do you say to that kid?
I say it's an appropriate question. And actually, I take it a step back. I asked, are they involved in some way with politics? Because what I frequently hear when I engage young people, and I share my story and why I do this job and how I care about young people in particular, and anyone who's ever felt left out and left behind in ensuring our governmental office and the AG's office is responsive to their needs, I ask, you need to get political. And what I mean by that is not just voting, paying attention to what happens in these government spaces, including the Supreme Court. Those justices didn't get there by accident. They went through a process and they were nominated by Trump with the expectation that they would politicize that court, and that's what they've done. And most recently in this election, which is one of the most horrific decisions I've seen come out of the Supreme Court, and of course there are many, including those way back in the day dealing with slavery and the enslavement of black people. But in this particular case, what they said is this president is above the law. Justice Sotomayor said it plainly. It used to be a fundamental principle that no one was above the law. That was literally the mandate of our Constitution and what I carry out as AG every day. And what that court did was say, but if you are the president, you are, and gave absolute immunity. And so I would stress to those young people, if you want to see a different result, vote, get involved. I would say even run for office, maybe become a justice yourself. Mobilize and get involved because you do have power. This idea that we don't have power, we do have significant personal power. And one exercise of that is our vote. And if you're not old enough to vote, you can phone bank in any state you want. You can door knock in any state you want to ensure that Trump does not become the next president of this country. And I've been stressing to folks, as you can imagine, I am talking about this election everywhere I go, that we're not making this stuff up. We have a record of evidence of what he accomplished when he was president. And very little, if anything at all, really went towards protecting our democracy, the affordability issues that people say they care about, access to affordable housing, access to health care. It was the opposite. It was to divide this country, to create hate and to promote it and perpetuate it, and to ensure that we don't become a democracy, but like he has said, so that he can become a dictator. So I would tell those young people, with all that at stake, there's a way that they can get involved, and there's a way they can show up in this moment in time, so we're not continuing on this trajectory that we see.
Last few minutes, another big-time Democrat, George Clooney, has urged the president to step aside. Deb in Halifax, you're first with the Attorney General. Andrea Campbell. Welcome, Deb.
Hi, Marjorie and Jim.
Hi.
I was actually on your show last year talking about my resident-owned community, Halifax Estates. And I wanted to ask the Attorney General to talk a little bit about her office's role in consumer protection, particularly as it relates to manufactured home communities and the homeowners who live in them. I know there's a lot going on right now in Massachusetts, and the AG's office commission and the AG's office in general have been hearing a lot from homeowners who are being severely mistreated by out-of-state investment companies buying up parks, neglecting the infrastructure while raising the rents and pushing people out. There's a class action suit right now against an out-of-state company, and there's also a suit in court that the AG's office assisted with by filing an amicus brief to support the right to purchase for that community. There's also legislation.
Well, Deb,
No, let
rather
Deb
than
keep going.
well,
Go ahead, Deb.
rather than you describing what the Attorney General's doing, maybe we should have her do it. Is that okay?
Well, my question is.
Oh, good.
Is what on the AG's agenda for 2024 and 2025 in these areas to assist mobile home communities?
Terrific. Thank you, Deb. We really appreciate it. Nice to talk to you again.
Absolutely. And so we have said we're going to focus on all things housing because we know affordability is the number one issue that people care about. And again, while I'm telling folks to get out and vote for Biden and Harris, who are partners in this work, including on housing. And we have done a whole host of things in this space, and Deb, I appreciate you summarizing some of that. But one is, of course, the enforcement of the MBTA communities law, which is critical, and we can't lose sight of that because it's a tool that can bring about more housing, particularly housing that's near transit. We're at the forefront of enforcing that law. The second is everything having to do with just access to housing, making sure that people are not discriminated against in that process and trying to find housing. And the last, and also I will just stress, not just access to housing, but also the conditions in which people live. We have a neighborhood renewal division in our office that goes into communities to take blighted property, vacant property, and turn it into beautiful housing that is affordable. We were just in Fitchburg highlighting that. And then lastly, manufactured housing. Continued actually a housing tour where I went to Tenant and met with residents there who live in manufactured housing to make it crystal clear to them that we have not forgotten in this housing conversation those that live in this housing that is significantly not only housed by elders and seniors, but is indeed affordable. And you have folks coming together and buying the property up themselves as residents, which is extremely powerful. That was the case where we went to visit. And so we've updated our guidance recently on manufactured housing, including people's rights, and did a Q&A. So, Deb, check out our website. If you're on social media, I would encourage folks to go on social media. That guidance hadn't been updated in, I think, over a decade. And so we did that recently to make sure that folks knew we care about folks living here. We did file an amicus brief in support of more resident home ownership so that private corporations are not taking over this type of housing. So it's critical, and we're going to continue to take it on because at the end of the day, housing is the number one issue. And lastly, I have to stress this. We also established a housing unit in the office, which is the first of its kind in the history of the office.
Deb, thanks for the call. We appreciate it.
Thank you,
877-301-8970.
Attorney General, tell us what's going on with Uber and Lyft. You wrote a piece about this for the Globe.
Oh, Uber and Lyft. Mm-hmm. I am so excited. I first have to give credit to my team, not just the lawyers, the staff, the administrative assistants, the paralegals, you name it. This was a hard-fought agreement, and the team worked really hard and day and night in some instances to give drivers the benefits they deserved. And let's not forget at the beginning the companies were pushing this false choice that you had to have. If they wanted flexibility for drivers, they couldn't get basic benefits. And we pushed back on that, and because of our advocacy, they have both. They have flexibility, and they now have a minimum pay that's $32.50. They have access to health care, to an insurance program that's like workers' comp. They have access to paid leave, so if they get sick or someone in their family, they have access to these critical benefits that we all take for granted probably. They're protected against discrimination. If they are going through a process and they are removed for some reason from the app, they now have an appeal process related to that decision. And this affects thousands of drivers in Massachusetts, namely poor folks or folks from communities of color. So it is about those who feel left out or left behind. And lastly, I will just stress that's a reason people should care, because it not only affects thousands of residents in Massachusetts, but most importantly, this infrastructure is a critical part of our transit system, in our transportation system, especially as you see the T have its issues here and there. So we're proud. And it's historic in that this is the floor, of course, they can always get more benefits, but the floor, and it's a significant one compared to what we're seeing in the country.
I think when you announced the decision, or maybe in the op-ed, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you said, this is done, but I support the ballot question that would give these drivers the right to unionize. Did you attempt to have that in the deal with the rideshare companies and they resisted? Is that why that ballot question is still outstanding?
No, so the ballot question is a separate track, separate conversation, and it always was.
Well, why not include it in that conversation and then negate the need for a ballot question if you could cut a deal?
A couple of different reasons. So they're seeking a ballot initiative. Just at some point, Uber and Lyft were seeking a ballot initiative that would have, frankly, not given drivers much of anything, including far less than what we got them, significantly less. And so that is a separate question that is working through that legal process to become law. It was not in the purview of our case against Uber and Lyft, which involved misclassification from independent contractors to employees. So we kept it in that lane. Okay. And also, not only to get them the benefits that they deserve, they're going to pay us $175 million. And the bulk of that will go back to drivers who were denied these benefits in the past. So it's an agreement that looks forward but also backwards at that harm. And then on the ballot question, the unionization effort, it was just timely that we set the floor, but if they, of course, earn the rights to bargain and to form a union, which I think that is something they should be entitled to, so people get out and vote on the ballot questions, that is an opportunity for them to go back to the table with the companies and, of course, ask for more, which I think employees should always do.
Jasper and Marlborough, you're on with the Attorney General. Welcome.
Hello. I wanted to ask a question in regards to state information and PSAs. I did want to congratulate on the recent anti-abortion PSAs, but I did want to ask. I can't hear. I only noticed in Spanish.
Can you hold 1 second? You can't hear anything?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not your end. It's our end. Jasper.
She's very low.
Oh, can you turn up the? Marjorie's going to help you.
I hear you, but I can't hear her.
Oh, Jasper.
Does this help?
Jasper?
Start that again. Jasper, start again. Is that okay,
good?
Attorney General?
Okay.
Good, we're good now. Start again, please.
All right.
Thank you.
So my question is about state information and PSAs. So I did want to congratulate on the recent anti-abortion PSA, but I only noticed it in English and Spanish. And I do notice that a lot of Portuguese speakers would benefit from that information, especially in my community. I am a Portuguese speaker. Okay. I often relay information to my community, but I can only spread information so quickly.
That's right. First of all, thank you, Jasper, I think it is, right?
Jasper, it is,
Jasper,
yeah.
Thank you for the call, and we worked with the Department of Health and the administration on that and can absolutely go back to them and encourage different languages, including Portuguese. We do our best through our Fair Labor Division and wage theft cases, including our strategic plan of including several different languages, so we can bring that back to them. And it's a critical campaign. It's everything having to do with these crisis pregnancy centers, and I'll put that in quotes, or these anti-abortion centers giving misinformation to folks that they can, but really in reality, they cannot get access to reproductive health care, abortion care at these facilities. So we'll bring that back for sure. Thank you for calling in.
Jasper, thanks. We've spoken, I know you've talked about this ad nauseum, but obviously the issue is still outstanding. Steward Health Care. We asked you a couple of months ago if possible criminal charges were on the horizon for the Ralph De La Torres of the world, and your quote was, "Everything is on the table," and you're nodding in agreement for those who are not watching on the streaming. Since we saw you, Malta has indicted Ralph De La Torre and another executive. One of the bases for the indictment, the criminal indictment, is the diversion of money to consulting fees. And here in Massachusetts, we had a lot of diversion of money to Ralph De La Torre's personal needs or desires. At the same time, the Globe reported that a device, an embolism coil, had been repossessed, which would have saved the life of a woman, Ms. Rashid. Instead, she is dead. We have learned that they're surveilling, spending as much as $440,000 a month, thanks to great Globe reporting, surveilling. Are you still looking at the possibility of criminal charges against any of the individuals in the leadership of Steward?
Everything is on the table. And I will continue to say that because I can't actually say any more than that, other than all of this information we're fully aware of, what's public, and then there's information, of course, available to us because, for example, we're part of the bankruptcy proceeding. We've inserted ourselves, and we will hold Steward accountable. Well, there's a process that we have to go through in any investigation, anything the office does, and we'll work on it with a sense of urgency, that's for sure. And when we can share more about the conclusion of that, we will show up publicly in a space like this and other spaces to make sure people know about that full analysis when appropriate. Right now, in addition to that analysis, which is fully within our wheelhouse at the AG's office, the other piece that is critically important, I don't want to sugarcoat this, and I have not been since the very beginning, I'm absolutely concerned about the state of affairs of the current facilities and access to health care or lack thereof, the possible shuttering of hospitals in certain communities. And so we're working with the governor and the administration to be as creative as we can, even though that's really their lane, to ensure continuation of access to health care, providers also getting the wages they deserve. And I will stress to folks in this moment in time, because I know at some facilities the numbers are declining in terms of folks going to these facilities for care. If you actually want to continue to get care from some of these facilities, use your feet. Use your sort of voting, meaning by showing up at these facilities to say these facilities matter to our community. Because the administration looks at those numbers too. Who's using them, when, for what purposes, as they fight creatively to work with the legislature to make sure we have access to care.
By the way, is the legislature going to finish its work on private equity oversight?
I hope so. I know
they're leaving in 3 weeks.
I hope so. I think that's at the top of the list for us. I know it's been a priority for them, along with other pieces of legislation.
You know, one thing, you are both lawyers and I'm not, so I don't understand why, like right out of the box, if you were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, as Jim said, to spy on some guy and his kid as he's walking her to school and putting a track so they can follow people in their house, and you're granting people such exorbitant salaries as a for-profit that this dilatory character can be buying these $90 million yachts or whatever they cost, at the same time as the embolism coil, that medical equipment that could have stopped the bleed in the liver of the 39-year-old woman, Secunda Rashid, who died after giving birth at St. Elizabeth's. I don't understand why that just right away isn't a criminal act. Is it because they haven't regulated for-profit hospitals? I just don't get why we even need that extra step. It seems so obvious to me that's a criminal thing to do.
Well, we have a legal system and we have a process where everyone's afforded a certain level of rights in that process, whether it's a criminal investigation, a civil investigation. I just talked about Uber and Lyft. If they get deactivated by the company, and the company says this person was doing something horrific, they still should have a process, just like our legal process affords everyone that. The same is true here. That being said, I want the public to know we're not only focused on that access to care issue and inserted ourselves in the bankruptcy proceedings, et cetera, and we're the only state robustly showing up because they have facilities in other states. That accountability question of holding them accountable, that is top of the list in the office. The team is working every single day on that. When we can share after a full investigation and gathering of information, and we know that's not easy with Steward to get information, we're doing that. We will come back and share on that accountability question. But the last piece that's important that Jim stressed, that legislative fix, the private equity, that's equally important because there are some transactions that if the AG's office had some power in real time, in the moment, could have reviewed certain transactions, including MPT and this lease question and the rent question. There are certain transactions the office could have reviewed but didn't have the power to do at the time. They could have attached conditions, stopped the transaction from happening. So that legislative piece is just as important. So we're working all angles to protect our people. And I obviously inherited this, so I had to get up to speed on years of information, and some of it very painful, as are reported on by the Globe and other public outlets, about where they were directing resources to when it should have been directed to patients, when it should have been directed to providers. And so we are mindful of that, and we're working really hard.
877-301-8970 is the number. Where do you want to go?
Jacob in Brighton, you're on with the Attorney General. Thank you for calling.
Hi, Jacob.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Sure.
Attorney General Campbell, when we went to renew, so I'm an apartment renter. When we went to renew our lease, one of our roommates left and a new one came in. The company which handles the property management for our landlord charged us a $500 leasing fee for adding the new person on. So I was under the impression that besides rent, landlords could legally charge for rent, first month, last month, security deposit, and a lock change. But the property management company said, oh, anytime a new person is added to the lease, this fee applies. It's separate. It's not part of any deposit. So since they're property managers and not landlords, I mean, I'm just confused why they feel entitled to charge us for the $500 for changing out a name. I mean, I can't imagine any services were rendered. Credit checks are much less expensive than that. And our decision was either to pay up or not pay and risk having them pull the lease offer from under us. So, I mean, what can we do about this? At this point, we paid the fee, but we're out $500, and that's a lot of money.
Great question,
so,
Jacob.
Jacob, first of all,
Thanks.
God bless you. Thank you for calling, because we get a lot of questions into the office by renters where they're being charged a fee that is unwarranted. So because your case is so specific and we want more information about the management company, et cetera, if you could stay on, Kira and Julia from ISC, which is our front line, they're on the phones all the time taking constituent
What does that
complaints.
mean?
Stay on.
What is ISC?
What is ISC?
What? Thank you very much.
I only
Information
did
service
that so
to
they
give her
could,
an opportunity.
exactly, so they could be highlighted in their own voice. Our team is the best.
So you actually knew what it stood for?
Of
I'm kidding.
course.
I was kidding.
And normally you see Lauren, but yes. So Kira's here. So if you could stay on, and we can get your details, we'll follow up and get on this ASAP.
Jacob, do not go away. We'll get
She's
your
also
contact
here with
info.
Julia, who's one of our co-ops.
You want to introduce anybody else or no?
Yes, here's Sydney and Molly. From Comms.
This is a general question about renting, just because I've seen a lot of apartments. I can't believe what they're charging people to rent these places. It's the city or town, I presume, Attorney General. If you have wood rotting or stairs falling apart or whatever, that's the city or the town that you have to go to complain about that landlord. Or what do people do in those situations?
It can vary. So, it could be your local public health, for example,
Yeah.
if it's a sanitary code violation or something else. Some people obviously try to work directly with their landlord or the management company and say, hey, wait a minute, you can't charge this.
Yeah.
Or it could be our office. We get a lot of calls into ISC or CARD, which is another consumer protection division in our office, that they take calls, emails, or a hotline. And so we we work to be responsive and to direct them to the appropriate space.
Okay.
So it depends sometimes.
Can I ask you a question?
No,
It's a
because you're supposed to go to Paul.
Paul, you're right.
Paul
Thank
and Braintree.
you.
Thank
Good,
you, Attorney
somebody's
General.
paying attention.
Yeah.
Paul and Braintree. Wow.
Hey, Jim.
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Jim, Marjorie.
Hi.
Wow, it was like
I don't mind waiting.
smackdown. Go ahead, Paul. I'm kidding.
watching
Go ahead.
I'm watching on YouTube.
Great.
I have a
Hi,
quick
Paul.
question.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
a bit of an echo, but I'll just continue.
Please.
I have a neighbor who's filing a wrongful termination case. And in the process, she went to MCAD, Mass Commission Against Discrimination, because age discrimination was part of it. She turned 70, and this health provider let her go at that age. She was told that the window of opportunity to file an age discrimination case is only 300 days.
Yeah.
That had passed. But there's 3 years to file a wrongful termination suit. Why the discrepancy? They're two sides of the same coin. It doesn't make any sense to me or to her.
Paul, thanks.
Paul, first of all, thank you for the question. And it may be something to look into. I do know the MCAD we work closely with them because we get mandatory referrals from the MCAD in the context of employment and also in the context of housing. And when I was working with Governor Deval Patrick, that was one of my agencies. And I will just stress, it's a critical agency because it's the first place you can go to address any discrimination. And you're not charged something, right? This is the direct access for people to address it. And so sometimes when determining what a statutory deadline should be, it's about a fairness question to those who might be on the other side. It's about process. It's a whole bunch of things. So that being said, I think it's something we can look into. Sorry to hear that. We've heard folks get really frustrated when they go and they miss the deadline because they didn't know. But if I will say, if she's not getting somewhere in other channels, feel free to still reach out to the office because I don't know the details of her case. People call about a lot of different things, and who knows, there may be something that's relevant. So, Paul, if she wants to follow up with us, she can and she should.
Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate your call.
Just to stress on that,
Please.
It always varies and depends. I think as a legislature right now is looking at where we extend statutes of limitations and deadlines on certain types of cases, whether it's child abuse or violence, family violence, whatever it is, it's always an ongoing conversation. So I appreciate Paul's work. And I will just say for anyone who's involved with the MCAD, it's an agency that still needs a lot of work, more human capital, more resources. The folks work hard, but it really does need more significant investment, and that's something we're working with the administration on.
Attorney General, yesterday we had a brief discussion with the mayor about the demotion of former Deputy Superintendent Eddie Crispin, who was told by Commissioner Cox he had to choose between a position on Commissioner Cox's command staff or stay on the Post Commission, the statewide entity created during criminal justice reform in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and things like that. You appointed Crispin to Post. He chose to stay there. That is former Deputy Superintendent Crispin, and as a result, demoted, $40,000 pay cut. Here's what Mayor Wu said yesterday when we asked her how she felt about the Commissioner Cox's decision.
I fully back his judgment. We've achieved great results, and the commissioner is doing an amazing job leading this department. He needs to have every ability to shape the team around him.
You know, and Adrian Walker wrote a great column, and I want to quote from what Adrian wrote. He says, this isn't about Cox's right to pick his team, which no one is really disputing. It's about how it can possibly be that supporting better training and accountability, meaning through the Post Commission, conflicts with serving on that team. That's the question that Cox and Wu can't or won't answer. You praised the appointment of, and you made it, of former Deputy Superintendent Crispin. What's your position on this demotion, the decision by Cox and its support by Wu?
One, I want to stress that I think at moments that's been lost. Post is a significant commission. As you just said, it came out of the criminal legal reform conversations at the State House post George Floyd. So, folks, you now have an entity not only pushing for greater transparency and training in departments to be equal and the same across the state, because that is not the case now, but also accountability. So where an officer does something wrong, you can go to Post to have them decertified as an officer in law enforcement. That's a critical tool. They play a critical role. I have several appointees to Post, and one of those appointees has to come from a list from MAMLIO, which represents minority officers. I've known them for years since my work as a city councilor in Boston.
Which Crispin did come from. Yeah.
Exactly. So there were 3 folks submitted. We did our thorough background, and all have worked hard. All of those nominees have continued to work hard. Eddie's application was outstanding. I've known him because of my work on the city council and the work he did in community. But the number of letters of support and recommendations, it was incredible, including support from folks who serve within BPD who also supported him joining Post. That was also part of the process. He is serving, and unfortunately, we get the news that he is going to have to choose between his Post appointment and serving on command staff. And we stress that he should be allowed to do both. That it's not a violation of the statute and it's not a violation of the conflict of interest law, because we took that into consideration. If anything, it actually encourages the Post statute and everything, and policy and practice encourage folks to be active law enforcement and also to serve in some meaningful role, to serve on Post, because there's a perspective they bring. And I was confident, as was my team, that he would not have violated any secrets, of course, of Commissioner Cox or anyone else in serving in that role, or he serves in MAMLIO and other entities. And so that's a decision, obviously, for Commissioner Cox and the mayor in terms of whether or not he keeps both or not. I've made my position clear. And
to them? Have you made it clear to them?
I've made it clear to the city of Boston, and as has my team. And not to discount Commissioner Cox and the role he plays. I have a great relationship with him. We do great work. But on this particular question, the question is, what's the rationale? And first, it was a conflict of interest. That's not the case. A conflict of a statute. That's not the case, or something else. And so you got to be crystal clear on the rationale and reasoning, which I think is really important here in terms of when you shift somebody. Because people, of course, are looking, but most importantly, if we talk about equity, we talk about fairness, there needs to be a legitimate reason as to why.
And you haven't heard such a reason yet?
No.
Attorney General Beth in Milton's text, she says, I want to ask the Attorney General about businesses accepting cash. You mentioned before on this show that it was state law to accept cash, but according to Beth anyway, she said state parks don't accept cash, and now the T won't either, neither of which I was aware of, but that's what she claims.
I'm not sure what she's referring to. So, yes, we are anytime there is some agency that looks to not receive cash, we are on top of that. And we have some ongoing matters right now where we're looking at certain entities and facilities where they are requiring folks to be cashless when they enter, and the inequities around that. Even if they look to do it in a fair way where there's machines and they're close by, is it accessible to someone who may have a disability? Is it accessible to young people who may not have a credit card or something else, or whatever it is? And so we are on top of that. But if Beth has specific questions, I would say she should stay on.
She's a texter. Text us again, Beth, with your contact info.
Thank you.
And we'll get back to you. Let's go to William.
Oh, we have some from Jamie, our producer, says the MBTA announced Tuesday their contactless payment option on buses at subway stations and on the Green Line and Mattapan Line tries to roll out on August 1st.
So, I mean, I would say for the Charlie card issue, that's been ongoing because they would say there were machines at different places. We can look into that, but I think it's a question for the administration. They're obviously looking to be as accessible as they can to make it easier for folks to get on all transits, but we can look into it.
William in Boston, you're on with the Attorney General. Thank you for calling. Hi.
Good morning, Attorney General. I have a question on Senate Bill 887. It's called the Anti-Bullying Act, and what it does is it helps elderly residents if they're being bullied by other tenants, and it also helps them if they're being bullied by management. Bullying is a stupid word. It should be harassment. And it's been, lying dead in the Senate for God knows how long. I want to know if you support it, and if you do not, why not?
Thank you for the question. I have to look into it. We have gone up to the State House to actually support a lot of pieces of legislation as they relate to elders. We also even established an elder justice unit in our office. So even if legislation that we think is significant doesn't pass the State House, we still have tools in our office to help elders when it comes to scams and consumer protection issues, harassment, bullying, discrimination, you name it. So I would suggest, what was the name of it?
William in Boston.
So, William, I would suggest if folks are experiencing something specific, reach out to us. On this particular legislation, I have to get into the weeds because I'm not sure the status. And there are a lot of bills at the State House.
William, thank you
for the concept,
for the call.
Anyone who is experiencing harassment and discrimination can reach out to our office.
Can I ask one? I was thinking about what you just said about you haven't heard a compelling reason, again, for the demotion very quickly of former Deputy Superintendent Eddie Crispin. And you obviously voice your respect for Commissioner Cox. Do you have a hypothesis about what else is going on?
I have no idea. I've been telling folks that's the question for the mayor and the commissioner. It's their decision whether or not they want him to serve on command staff and the post. I only, of course, as he is appointing authority, we followed the process. We followed the law, of course. And he has the right, based on the law at least, to serve on both. So that's on them. And of course, they have discretion. So I'm not in their shoes or position.
Attorney General, lots of people know that you and other AGs around the country, many people have worked very hard to get this settlement that would have given Massachusetts as much as $110 million to fund prevention, treatment, and recovery programs surviving the opioid epidemic. The Supreme Court last month rejected that deal. I know you were quoted in the Globe as saying you were going to continue efforts to get that funding. But what is your reaction to the decision, and how, $110 million is a lot of money. How can that be replaced?
Well, I know there are many folks who are absolutely disappointed with that result because they were expecting resources to come in to help with treatment, recovery, and everything we would need to take on the opioid crisis, which is still significant in Massachusetts and, of course, in this country. And I feel bad also for those folks who are seeking some closure, but also accountability from Purdue and the Sackler family that don't have that. It's been reopened. But they can feel confident that my team, and we have already rolled up our sleeves to figure out what comes next. And there are different moving pieces and parts where we go from here to work with other states, because it's not just Massachusetts, of course, and other stakeholders, to ensure those families get the accountability they deserve, and that our states, Massachusetts being one of them, but many other states, also get the resources we need to continue to address this crisis. So it is now ongoing. It's back to us. And there are a lot of procedural issues, but I will come back to folks publicly when some things have actually worked out. So it's going back to the bankruptcy process, and now we have to insert ourselves there.
And by the way, we should just say the flip side of this for people concerned about it, it allowed the Sackler family to insulate billions of dollars of their own money, even if insulate them from future litigation. So the plus was what you were describing, a lot of money for people and institutions and governments who need it. But the flip side is that the Sacklers, some would say, got away with murder, literally and figuratively.
So I know there are different perspectives on this. The settlement, everything was the leadership of my previous AG, my current governor, Healy, and I have to give her credit. We were the first state to even sue them.
In their personal capacity, the first in America.
Capacity, the first in America. And so this AG's office has been stepping up, and I have to give the governor credit. She has led this work. And I do know there were different perspectives on the settlement. Some were excited, get money quickly and get resources to communities and residents on recovery as quickly as we can. Others said, no, we need to push the envelope. So the Supreme Court made their decision, and now we're stuck with that.
Was it the wrong? You think it was the wrong decision?
In this particular instance, I would have liked to see that money come into our state because we know people need it right now, not just for treatment and recovery, for employment opportunities, for housing. The list is long in terms of the municipalities that are calling our office because of our opioids work and calling the fund to say we need resources to be able to take this on, and significant resources. People are dying every day from substance use disorder. And so it is disappointing on the one hand. On the other hand, I understand the other perspective. I don't want to discount that because these are all families that have lost something, including family members who have died because of the Sackler family in Purdue. So now we just have to go back to the drawing board and push as aggressively for more funding, for more accountability, and we're up for that challenge.
Mayat from Chestnut Hill, I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Welcome.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's Tim Mayat, good friend of Emily Rooney.
Oh, good,
Tim.
Tim. Thank you.
What's up?
Hi, how are you?
We are, too. We're good friends, too. So just so you understand where we all are. Go ahead. Whatever. Sorry. Shouldn't have brought that up. Go ahead.
I found out that my medications, a couple of my medications, are actually cheaper if you buy them out because paying copay.
Oh, you can't.
Hey, Tim, can I say something to you? The connection's horrible. You should just ask your question because we're going to lose you otherwise. And we'll do the best we can.
Yeah,
what is your question for the Attorney General?
So the question is there any way that, is this an ongoing problem that you've heard about? And is there any way I can get money going backwards?
Maybe Tim should stay on. Because he's breaking out.
Yeah, Tim, the Attorney General, I don't know if you heard that, asked you to stay on, and she'll have one of her staff people talk to you.
Hear you, Tim.
Because we're not getting the full story.
So at least if we get your number, Tim, we can follow up.
Stay on, give your contact information, and the Attorney General's office will follow up, as they said.
And just to make it clear, we do follow up, and I get the readout of everyone we say to stay on. We follow up. I get the notes. We refer where appropriate if we're not the appropriate space to solve the complaint. So, Tim, stay on and share your number, and we will follow up.
Well, Marjorie's looking at something there. You are involved now, I believe, in some investigation into this the situation with Sandra Birchmore, who originally was declared to have, I believe, by the medical examiner, to have committed suicide. And there's been a very prominent pathologist hired who says, in fact, it's homicide. And my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is you've taken over a piece of this from the local DA, from Morrissey's office. Can you tell us what your involvement is and what the status of this is? Ongoing.
And, of course, I wish I could tell folks and be more forthcoming, but in certain ongoing investigations, we cannot be. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I want to be crystal clear. This is a horrific case. And if you followed any of the coverage related to this, I would say beautiful young lady, it's horrific. And it provides another reason why people should care about posts.
By some police officers, right?
I will just say it's ongoing, but I would say if you follow at least what's been public, someone died. At the end of the day, someone died. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget that. But it also lifts up the importance of post in this context, because Post also plays a role here. I can't speak publicly on my role, but Post has, as they're undergoing whether or not these officers that are alleged to have been involved should be decertified. That's ongoing with Post. But again, this commission is critical to accountability because they can say you can't be in law enforcement anymore if there's misconduct, whereas before them, you could go to another job, maybe in another state, and do whatever you wanted, even if you were found guilty of wrongdoing. So this is ongoing for us. But again, I think an opportunity to lift up the important work of Post.
John in the car, thank you for calling.
Hello, John.
Hi. I was just wondering, my mother, she gashed her leg a couple weeks ago, brought it to UMass Memorial, got there at 6 at night, finally left at 6 in the morning.
Wow.
The entire waiting room was overrun with illegal immigrants. And they were all being processed. They all had green wristbands on. So they went through security. And then I have a lot of friends in the healthcare profession. And it's not just UMass Memorial, it's Mass General. It's affecting the treatment. I mean, it's ridiculous. And they're just it's like a processing thing. Will anything be done the way it was done with the airport? You know?
So is John? Is it John?
John.
Well, first of all, sorry to
John
hear about
McCarr.
your mom, and I hope she's okay. I'm not aware of, who was in the emergency room at that time or even what their status was. So I want to be careful even when I characterize all immigrants as illegal, which I would never, because some may be there under some asylum status or something else. I want to be clear. With that being said, to your question, we're working with the administration every day and community-based stakeholders who care deeply about this issue, about the influx of migrants coming to Massachusetts. Our lane is making sure folks know what their rights are, just like those who came before them knew what their rights were. And so we are doing our part. I know the governor just made a decision that the airports are going to be cleared out and that emergency housing will be provided to folks. So that is underway and happening to get folks what they deserve. I will just have to stress, I live in Mattapan in Boston. Mattapan, if you know anything about the history of Boston, the demographics shifted frequently. You had Jewish families, you had Irish families, you had Italian families in the North End. Boston, robust migrant culture and history. Folks who came here undocumented with no status whatsoever, who were afforded benefits and privileges. And so as we have folks coming here from very desperate situations in other countries, we have to afford them some level of humanity. And not to suggest, John, you are not, so I want to be crystal clear. But I've been saying that to my team, we have to do our part in this moment in time. And one of the things I do want to also stress is it's not just about the humanity piece, and for some, the humanity and moral piece, they don't care. It's also about the workforce challenges that we have here in Massachusetts. You think about the number of jobs that are filled by immigrants and those who would describe themselves as immigrants. Our healthcare system, in many ways, would crumble, and that was articulated and evidenced by COVID. The folks who are doing the laundry, providing the food, the nurses, the elder care space. If you look at the number of Haitians who are participating in that workforce, if you don't have them coming for these jobs and doing what they can for their families and their kids, we are in trouble. And so I also stress the economics, the cultural, the humanity piece. It is significant, and I don't think that often is in the narrative, but it's just as important to our economy as well.
John, thanks for the call.
Do you
Appreciate
think the Supreme Court was right when it's ruled that you can arrest people and find people who are sleeping in so-called homeless encampments? That was one of their other recent decisions.
We have a minute.
We are we were on the other side of that. We filed an amicus working with another AG, and I will say we're continuing working with AGs for the Supreme Court to get it right. When it comes to us addressing those who are dealing with homelessness, we want to provide resources, housing. They don't need to be criminalized, especially if they have no place to go. And I think, again, another reason for folks to pay attention to what the court is doing. But the Supreme Court happens because of the president you pick. And so if you want a different Supreme Court, you want a different result, you better get out and vote for Biden and Harris. As simple as that.
On that note, good to see you, Attorney General.
Great
Thanks so much
Thank
for your
you
time.
very much, Attorney
Great to
General
see you
Campbell,
all.
for joining us.
Thank
we really
you.
appreciate
Thank you.
your time.